Compassion in World Farming with the support of the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment Coordination of the Government of Pakistan, UN Environment Programme, the International Nitrogen Management System, and the University of Agriculture in Faisalabad. Today's panel will share their perspectives on the urgent action that's needed and policy solutions that we hope to see emerge. We'll be covering the intersectional nature of nitrogen waste and pollution by communicating its relevance to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, and the UN Convention to combat desertification. We're showing how sustainable nitrogen management can deliver just, inclusive, and enduring progress towards delivering the Paris Climate Agreement and suggesting solutions to optimize nitrogen use in agri-food systems. And we're hoping it's going to inspire solutions around the multilateral policy agenda and accelerate ambition. So our first speaker here today is Mohammed Farouk, who serves as the Senior Joint Secretary for the Ministry of Climate Change and Environmental Coordination in the Government of Pakistan. He's a seasoned public sector professional with over 3 decades of experience in engineering, climate change, administration, and strategic planning. In his current role, he has played a pivotal role in steering national policies and international commitments related to climate change and has represented Pakistan at the UNFCCC and the IPCC. So, Mr. Farouk, you have the floor.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, it's an immense pleasure and an honor for me to be here on this side event, making nitrogen visible through Rio Convention. And I'm highly thankful to all of you for joining to address one of the most pressing problems of our time, that is the global environmental agenda and with nitrogen management. Nitrogen, as we know, is a cornerstone of the agriculture system and for the food security. But the problem with the nitrogen is that it has always been mismanaged, overuse of the nitrogen, and that is causing a lot of problem. I mean, it's causing water pollution, it's causing biodiversity loss, and it is also causing climate change. And conversely, nitrogen deficiencies can limit agriculture yield, undermining food security and economic stability, particularly in developing countries. And this is exactly what we are now seeing in all the developing countries. The food production is becoming less and less per acre. And the main reason is, of course, climate change is one reason, like the rising temperature, etc. But one of the main factors is also the mismanagement of the nitrogen. By making nitrogen visible, we acknowledge its dual nature and underscore the necessity of balanced and efficient nitrogen use. Our primary objective today is to eliminate the critical role of nitrogen in sustainable development and environmental conservation. We aim to foster a comprehensive understanding of how nitrogen, a vital element of life, has become a double-edged sword due to human activities. Through insightful discussion, we can explore initiative and innovative solutions to manage nitrogen more sustainably, aligning with the goal of Rio Convention. That is the Convention on Biological Diversity, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the UN Convention on Desertification. This visibility is crucial for informed policy making, resource allocation, and public awareness. No doubt this is very important, because until and unless we integrate this nitrogen management in the policies and in the plan, specifically those related to the agriculture, I think a more problem would be there for the developing country. Because nitrogen on one side, if it is good for the production, for the productivity of the agriculture, but it overuse cause a lot of problem. So we have to integrate this nitrogen management into the policies and the plan of the government. By bringing together expert, policymakers, and stakeholders from various sectors, we seek to build a collaborative framework that integrate nitrogen management into broader environmental strategies. This event is not merely a forum for dialogue, but a catalyst for concrete action and commitment that will drive global efforts towards sustainable nitrogen use. Pakistan is committed to leading by example in pursuit of sustainable nitrogen management. Our country, blessed with diverse ecosystem and vibrant agriculture sector, understand the pivotal role that nitrogen plays in our national development. However, we are also acutely aware of the environmental challenges posed by unsustainable nitrogen use. Being least responsible for global emission, our country is one of the most vulnerable in the world to climate change. In recent years, Pakistan has undertaken several initiatives for this mitigation and adaptation, like the 10 billion tree tsunami program. Then we have the List Living Indus initiative, which was declared as the global initiative under the UNEP. And then Green Pakistan initiative. We are working on different initiative and different policies option. Number one, to reduce emission further as per our NDC's commitment to have adaptation in all the sector, to integrate adaptation measure in all the sector of the economy, to bring in transformational changes vis-a-vis adaptation. And then also for the agriculture sector, like we are working on the water sector through Living Indus initiative, because the temperature rise probably in Pakistan, it's around 1 degree centigrade higher than the rest of the world probably. And that is why we are impacted most. And we have seen this flooding and these, the cascading event, like it started from the heat waves to flooding, to then drought, so on and so forth. Pakistan is also actively participating in international collaboration and aims sustainable nitrogen management. We are a proud member of the Global Partnership on Nutrient Management, GEF, and are working closely with INMS and SNH to develop national nitrogen management strategies that align with the global best practices. During UNIA 6, we hosted a side event making nitrogen visible through sustainable development goal. Also, Pakistan is committed to integrating nitrogen management into broader environmental and climate policies. As I have already told you that we are working with the different sectors of the economy, because Ministry of Climate Change is this issue, the climate change is cross-cutting. So we are working with different ministries, department, with the provincial government, with local government, to bring in visible changes vis-a-vis this nitrogen management. We recognize that sustainable nitrogen use is not an isolated issue, but is intrinsically linked to our effort to combat climate change, protect biodiversity, and achieve sustainable development. By aligning our national policies with the objective of Rio Convention, we aim to create a holistic framework that addresses nitrogen management in a comprehensive and integrated manner. We intend to submit a third resolution on sustainable nitrogen management in UNIA 7, following the two resolutions led by South Asia. Organizing an event of this magnitude requires the collective effort and collaboration of many dedicated individuals and organizations. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our co-organizer, without whom this event would not have been possible. Firstly, I would like to thank Compassion and World Farming for their unwavering commitment to promoting sustainable and ethical farming practices. Their expertise in advocacy is invaluable in our quest for sustainable nitrogen management. We are also profoundly thankful to the UNEP for leadership in global environmental governance. Their guidance and support in organizing this event have been instrumental, and we look forward to continued collaboration in our shared vision. UNEP is leading the world probably in the fight against the climate. And we have seen in many countries, like in Pakistan, UNEP has a number of projects, a number of initiatives on which we are working, like the Living Indus initiative or adaptation plan, etc., etc. To the International Nitrogen Management, INMS, we are deeply grateful for their support and collaboration. Their pioneering work in advancing scientific understanding and policy development for nitrogen management is a cornerstone of our collective effort. University of Agriculture Faisalabad, they are also deserve special recognition because they are working on this nitrogen for a long time. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of our distinguished delegate and participant. Your engagement and contribution are vital to the success of this event. We are here today because of your commitment to a sustainable and prosperous future, and we look forward to your insight and expertise in our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to just underline the leadership role that Pakistan played as chair of G77 in Sharm el-Sheikh in getting us the loss and damage fund, and the enormous leadership role they played in the development of the Sustainable Development Goals. They were one of the key architects of that. I deserve a lot of credit for that. Our next speaker, which is joining us virtually behind me, is Yontis Soren Bako. He's the Secretary of State in the Ministry of Environment, Water and Forests in the government of Romania, where he is responsible for coordinating the ministry's international and European affairs. Prior to this post, he was elected to the Romanian Parliament, where he served as a member of the Environment Commission from 2017 to 20. And he served as the regional forest lead before this for WWF, where he led an international team advancing forest conservation programs in the region. You have the floor.
Excellencies, thank you for this introduction. It's my great pleasure and privilege to take part today in this important event. Our country has a long history of promoting sustainable nitrogen management, both at national but also international level. At national level, for the past 20 years, the Ministry of Environment focused on specific investments in manure management and wastewater treatment, while implementing several country-wide awareness programs for nitrogen management. Further on, it is our ambition to promote the best practices around the globe. Moreover, currently, it is widely acknowledged that the global economy faces significant inefficiency in nitrogen use, as 80% of the reactive nitrogen is lost into the environment, leading to water and air pollution, threatening human health, affecting biodiversity, and accelerating climate change. As we all know, nitrates are responsible for eutrophication and affect the potability of groundwater. Ammonia is a strong air pollutant, while nitrous oxide is an important and persistent contributor to climate change. Additionally, nitrogen plays a crucial role in ensuring food security, being a key component of fertilizers. The challenge we face is not in reducing the nitrogen use, but in minimizing the nitrogen loss. Enhancing nitrogen efficiency requires research, policy coherence and implementation, monitoring and evaluation. Also, above all, raising awareness at all levels, starting with political and policy levels. Despite its importance for environment and economy, nitrogen has a major disadvantage. It is invisible. Making nitrogen visible will require a strong international commitment for the following years. The main question we face today are how integrated is nitrogen in the existing bodies and initiatives, and what we can do. Of course, cooperation with other entities and multilateral environmental agreements at the international level will be instrumental. On these topics, UNEP Conventions on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and the Convention on Biological Diversity are already addressing, in some extent, nitrogen. But we must ask ourselves, how integrated are all these approaches? The recent initiative to set a nitrogen target on halving excess nitrogen loss by 2030 as part of the Kunming-Montreal framework is highly ambitious and calls for cooperation between various UN bodies and initiatives to ensure a unified approach in promoting sustainable nitrogen management. Particular attention should be given to nitrous oxide, which is the most underrated greenhouse gas. Significant progress may be achieved by including the nitrous oxide emissions under the Montreal Protocol and focusing on the attention of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition towards it. Currently, a fully integrated perspective on nitrogen is being developed under UNEP guidance through the Working Group on Nitrogen. I congratulate UNEP for this initiative and encourage further progress through close cooperation with and between member states towards achieving a significant progress in reduction of nitrogen waste by 2030. We are all aware that the expectations are high. To achieve this goal, the UNEP Working Group on Nitrogen has a challenging mandate to facilitate the development and implementation of effective integrated management at national levels. A roadmap outlining the working group activities and deliverables by 2030 is necessary, while the ongoing scientific support remains essential. I encourage UNEP to remain ambitious and to continue offering the member states a platform that facilitates and strengthens their cooperation. The working group's activities have a potential to be further enhanced by a new resolution on sustainable nitrogen management. I am aware of the Pakistan initiative for a new resolution. I trust that such initiative for a future resolution on nitrogen management will help raise awareness on nitrogen management. I conclude my intervention with a special thanks to the Compassion in World Farming for organizing this event and for its contributions and consistent efforts in making nitrogen visible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your input. And also, we'd like to recognize the role that Romania has played in keeping a leadership role in the area of nitrogen with the government of Pakistan, but also in New York. They also played a really important role in the Sustainable Development Goals. The mission has worked consistently to promote the advancement of governance for sustainable development. And it's been a pleasure working with them in New York, both on the issue of nitrogen, but also on the issue of sustainable governance. Our next speaker is Deshen Searing, who's the Director of Climate Change Division in UNEP, and she's held management and leadership positions across the United Nations for 33 years in national government and intergovernmental organizations. She has been actively involved in the intergovernmental negotiations as a key negotiator for least developed countries and contributed to the Least Developed Countries Expert Group and the Least Developed Countries Fund and the Green Climate Fund. In 2017, she was appointed UNEP's Regional Director and Representative for Asia Pacific, and prior to that post, she served as Director of Finance, Technology and Capacity Building Program here at the UNFCCC. And before joining the UNFCCC, she was the Deputy Director of UNEP's Regional Office. She holds a PhD from the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich in Forests, Economics and Policy. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Farouk, Mr. Baku, distinguished colleagues, delegates. This is really an important side event, and I want to thank Compassion in World Farming International in organizing this side event. On screen, you have many of the experts on nitrogen. I see a lot of colleagues. I see Professor Mark Sutton. I see colleagues from FAO. So really, for me, my focus will really talk about the importance of bringing nitrogen and emission of nitrous oxides, a potent greenhouse gas with a global warming potential, approximately 298 times that of carbon dioxide, into the discussions here. We know that over the last 4 decades, we've had nitrous oxide emissions rise by 30% and really driven largely by anthropogenic sources. And of course, here it's, when we start to look at agriculture, you start to look at livestock, you start to look at and how changes in nitrogen cycle influence carbon sequestration, methane emissions from soil, further impacting climate dynamics. The work at the UN Environment Program is really focused on, addressing pollution. And here, at the 4th session of the UN Environment Assembly, a resolution was introduced on sustainable nitrogen management. And this resolution asks the Executive Director of UNEP to consider options for facilitating improved coordination of policies across the global nitrogen cycle at national, regional, global levels, and to develop an integrated nitrogen policy. Building on this, we had the 5th session of UNEA where we adopted a second resolution on sustainable nitrogen management. And here it encouraged member states to accelerate action to significantly reduce nitrogen waste globally by 2030 and beyond through improved sustainable nitrogen management. And it talks about national action plans for sustainable nitrogen management. But I think, and we tried really hard to set a target, but we have the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework where they actually have a target. And I think that's been a significant step in this process. While our member states here talk about reporting on nationally determined contributions by February 25, we really urge our member states to start to think about looking at non-CO2 emissions. And I think here, I mean, nitrous oxide is really an important part of this, along with methane. So UNEP, the Working Group on Nitrogen was established in 2022. 95 member states have nominated focal points of the working group, and we've had 2 co-chairs appointed from India and Romania. These working groups have convened 5 times. They've looked at, they did an inventory of existing action plans on nitrogen management. They're working towards developing a template for voluntary national action plans, including 10 action areas. Currently, I've been informed that we're organizing consultations with countries to provide technical assistance for developing national action plans and creating a roadmap for reducing nitrogen pollution towards 2030. And as Mr. Farooq just said earlier, at UNEP 6, Pakistan also organized a side event on nitrogen, you know, keeping this agenda very much at the forefront of the UN Environment Assembly for member states. So member states will need to urgently take action to improve management of global nitrogen cycle. This includes sharing assessment methodologies, best practice, guidance documents, and emerging technologies for nitrogen recovery and recycling. You know, we look to member states to implement the UNEP resolutions 414 and 52 on sustainable nitrogen management, which will provide integrated management policy approaches to address the altered nitrogen cycle and to address sort of non-CO2 emissions. We call upon cooperation, and I think here's an extremely good opportunity to start to look at the processes. When you start to look at processes in the Convention on Biological Diversity, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and also looking at resolutions within UNEP. But I thank you very much for inviting UNEP to be here, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. And I think, you know, it's good to remember that the 3 Rio Conventions were negotiated in a much easier time period than we happen to live at the moment. And in spite of that, UNEP has managed to secure a Mercury Convention and is now well on the way to securing a convention on plastics. I heard the last session went very well, so fingers crossed that it happens this year. And just for those who are not engaged with UNEP, they've got a really good medium-term strategy that looks at the 3 triple planetary crises of biodiversity, climate, and pollution. And the last UNEA dealt with the synergies between that. And I think that's a real good way of trying to bring back things into a coherent process, which, of course, the SDGs were also about the interlinkages. So thank you very much. We now have someone who's already been mentioned, Professor Mark Sutton, who is an environmental physicist based at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology in Edinburgh, Scotland. An expert on atmospheric ammonia, Professor Sutton leads international research activities on nitrogen at the Science Policy Interface. He is the former chair of the International Nitrogen Initiative and currently directs UNEP GEF International Nitrogen Management System and the UKRI Global Challengers Research Fund's South Asian Nitrogen Hub. Professor Sutton is also the co-chair of the UNECE Task Force on Reactive Nitrogen, and he works closely with the UN and member states, including the UNEP's Science Policy Business Forum, and is the co-chair of the Task Force on Reactive Nitrogen of the Geneva Air Convention, and knows everything about about nitrogen. So, Professor Sutton, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Felix, and good morning, ministers, excellencies, directors, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you, even though I can't be with you in person today. Clearly, I don't know everything about nitrogen. I'm working hard and trying to find out more every day. And I think this side event is a great illustration of how nitrogen is really a key thing for climate and environment. Our message of the working together of the Rio Conventions is clearly a starting point. The Framework Convention dealing with climate, we know that carbon is really often the focus. Nitrogen gets forgotten. So making it visible is really important. We all know nitrous oxide, 300 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Let's not forget also things like nitrogen trifluoride, 16,000 times more powerful. Is not perhaps the thing anybody thinks about, nitrogen trifluoride, but is another illustration of that multi-dimensional nature of nitrogen that we need to manage. Now, as the minister from Pakistan has highlighted, nitrogen and food security has been fundamental to civilization. When there was a nitrogen problem in the 1920s, 1900s, 1920s, the nitrogen problem of society at that time was, can we get enough nitrogen to feed everybody, to make fertilizers? Ultimately, for most parts of the planet, we managed that, not with all parts, but we're now in many parts of the world in a situation with excess nitrogen, leading to inefficient systems, waste of resources, and pollution problems of air, land, and water. So it means it's also relevant for the Convention on Biological Diversity, for impacts on ecosystems, both terrestrial ecosystems, water systems, nutrient pollution. So there's a pan-dimensional problem of too much nitrogen in nature changes species composition, threatens biodiversity. We should not forget the UN Convention to combat desertification. And I think it's fair to say that so far our efforts have not given enough attention to that convention yet. It would be lovely to see some side events going at that convention as well. Look at it this way, nitrogen in agriculture is key to supply. It's interactions with water use efficiency under situations of increasing climate change, increasing drought. We may see farmers using even more nitrogen fertilizer, leading to even more nitrogen pollution in an attempt to compensate. Obviously, in a really dry climate, it doesn't help to put bags and bags of nitrogen on because it's simply going to be wasted. So it's clear that we need to work together across these Rio Conventions and make nitrogen more visible. But we have to go beyond. And as one of the speakers has already alluded to, the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution is a key one, and that's one I work with closely, that established its task force on reactive nitrogen in 2007. That Gothenburg protocol that they have in their air convention is up for renegotiation at the present, and the question will be, how can their ambitious targets fit together with the climate convention targets and the Convention on Biological Diversity? Now, I should speak frankly here, guys, because often what I see in the negotiations is a very small progress. In the Air Pollution Convention, people often talk about, can I reduce my emissions by 1 or 2% or 5%, pushing little bit by little bit. And at the same time, we have this Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Target 7 to 50% reduction at least of nutrient pollution, which includes nitrogen. So that's a massive difference of ambition. How are we going to get there? We're not going to get there, I would say, unless we want to get there. I mean, really want. And that means we need to turn around the question that nitrogen is just a problem to nitrogen is part of the solution. Because if we manage our nitrogen better, it means more goes into the farming system, better food security, less of that resource is lost to water and air. So it's an obvious win-win between nitrogen and climate and environment together. So we should want to change. Now, in our work we're working across the scientific community through the International Nitrogen Management System. We're preparing the first international nitrogen assessment for launch next year, 2025. On the way, we're also preparing an appetizer for you. The appetizer is a special report on nitrous oxide for climate and the ozone layer, to be presented at COP29 in Baku. And that's working together with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, together with the International Nitrogen Management System. So I'm not going to say too much about the results of that, but I'll allude to a few points. And one of the first things that I want to emphasize is that in the International Nitrogen Assessment, we're quantifying all those extra damage costs of nitrogen pollution for human health, for ecosystems, for climate. Those are really, really big numbers. They're the biggest numbers. So in a way, those should be the strongest motivator. But often people say, well, who really pays those costs? Is it really motivating us? Do we really have that willingness to pay? And that's why we also look at the waste of resources. Because if we take a value of $1.50 to $3 per kilogram nitrogen, just as a true cost of a nitrogen resource, add up all those losses, you get something like 300 to 600 billion US dollars worth of wasted resource. So if we can halve nitrogen waste, if we can meet the Kunming Montreal, then we're looking to save half of that, hundreds of billions of dollars per year worth of resource, i.e. good for the economy. We hope that message is one that can encourage parties to move faster, that they would actually like to help their economy by doing a nitrogen management better. One of the other messages which we are clearly talking about in the assessment, we're not just talking about scientific facts, but how we can bring those issues together, bring the problems together. And that's why we've been very much encouraging this discussion in the UNEP resolutions and in the working group on nitrogen as it started. I'm very pleased that the UNEP has taken that seriously, and the president of UNEP 6 appointed Mihai and Purvaja Ramachandran as nationally appointed co-chairs. So that's appointed at the highest level by the president of the United Nations Environment Assembly. Now, as part of that work, we're really grateful for the work of the Secretariat on the Convention on Climate Change and Dirk Nemetz, who joined at an early stage the task team to look at the possible options for intergovernmental coordination on the nitrogen cycle, so-called interconvention nitrogen coordination mechanism. Actually, what we see at the moment is that that working group is becoming that mechanism. It's evolving, it's developing, it maybe needs further establishment, but the game is already happening, and this event is an illustration of that. We've already had this discussion about the halving nitrogen waste that started first agreement in the Colombo Declaration in 2019. That moved rapidly to the EU with their farm to fork strategy, taking again a 50% reduction, and of course now in the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Again, let's ask the question, can we get there? And actually, when we started that discussion in 2018, it seemed 12 years to go. Yes, it's possible. And we have made big progress in the last 5 years because, the whole movement of getting everybody working together is happening. But are the cleaner practices in place yet? Not fully yet. And it's only almost 6 years to go until 2030. So that's going to be really, really tough to get there that quickly. That means that we need to be starting this morning with our management, with our investment of making it happen. That's why we talk about nitro finance. This is not finance just to have extra fertilizers. This is finance for nitrogen sustainability. Nitro meaning accelerate as well, that if you reduce your nitrogen waste, you can have less impact. So it's going to be really tough. We have to start now. Now, I want to finish off with a small conversation about nitrogen synergies and trade-offs, because it's clear that nitrogen is offering multiple win-wins: cleaner air, cleaner water, better for climate, better for economy. That's great. But there are some trade-offs, and I'm going to attempt to, if this works, show you a slide or two, not too many. And let's see if this works. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to go straight on from the title to a complicated slide. Here's the complicated slide. I'm going to show you an easier slide in a minute. But here's the complicated slide. This is from the European Nitrogen Assessment. On the right hand is warming. On the left hand is cooling. And you can see the big graph from CO2 at the top. but you can also see other impacts as we look across this biosphere effects of CO2 as well as the combustion effect. You've got effects of nitrous oxide, of course, is warming. We've got a tropospheric ozone formation from nitrogen oxides, which is warming. But on the other side of the coin, you have several cooling aspects of nitrogen. So the fertilization of forests by nitrogen pollution is bad for biodiversity, but it's also a cooling effect because the trees grow more and absorb more carbon out of the atmosphere. Similarly, aerosol. Aerosol is a cooling effect. So ammonium nitrate is a cooling effect. Now, it's the same issues we faced with sulfur dioxide in the past. We need to reduce sulfur dioxide to reduce those human health effects. But in reducing those sulfate aerosol, the world gets warmer. It makes it even harder to address climate change. So there's a big challenge there. What are we going to do with this conundrum? And if this works, here we are. There's the last slide. It's a slightly easier summary. So we've got some cooling aspects and some warming aspects. Joined up nitrogen is going to give us win-wins, but we need to accept that some of our impact on environment is already cooling the planet. But if we want to reduce that particulate matter and have better human health, we have to accept that we're going to have to go even further than you might have wanted. And the same with the nitrogen deposition. It's also affecting biodiversity. And here's some health costs at European scale. So all of those have got massive health costs. The biggest cost is, of course, with that particulate matter. So we need to address that together. That means it's a slightly complicated message when it comes to nitrogen and climate, particularly when we take the joined up approach, because as you reduce, you need a joined up approach to get there for nitrogen, but there'll also be some warming effects as well as cooling effects. Now, I think my last slide here, I'm going to put these all up. There we are. You can see all the messages. So it starts with the carbon. We need to consider nitrogen. Greenhouse gas has got to include nitrous oxide. Successful mitigation on N2O means we've got to take a joined up approach transforming the nitrogen cycle. There are multiple win-wins, but remember the bottom line message right at the end. There is a penalty for the aerosol that we have to accept for cleaner air. And don't forget, this whole emerging world of ammonia fuel is a great opportunity and a massive risk. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Sutton. And I do think that you reminding us that there's only 6 years till 2030 to hit that target from the CBD. And I think it's just to recognize that both of our speakers here will be leaving and thank them very much. And I think a colleague is also leaving online. So thank you very much for being here. I think that there's clearly need for some policy advice on how to implement this the strategy on nitrogen, as we've seen examples in a number of countries where it hasn't worked, and there's been a reaction from farmers and from the constituencies, the people. So I think there's really some work that maybe UNEP and others can help on that basis. So we're going to move to Dr. Imabel Wizea, who's the Livestock Policy Officer at FAO. He leads policy analysts to support NDCs for climate change in livestock systems and leads several projects on reducing enteric methane emissions from ruminants. He also provides technical advice to the Livestock Environmental Assessment Performance, or LEAP, partnership, and contributes to the global agenda for sustainable livestock. I think you have some slides.
Thank you, Chair, for the introduction. So it's a great pleasure to be here and also to share a couple of slides on the issue of sustainable nitrogen management, which at FAO we have been working a lot, and also through our sister agencies and other UN entities to address sustainable nitrogen management. So for this presentation today, I would want to focus much more on livestock systems, but also talking about other systems, especially the crop production. So Yes. So my presentation will really talk about mainly why do we need to assess nitrogen, and especially in context of climate change, addressing nitrous oxide, but also other nitrogen compounds across different agri-food systems, and understand different pathways that are possible, and of course the way forward under the different convention, as that's the main discussion for this side event. We know that given the increase in the global population that's also expected by 2050, the production of food, especially terrestrial animal product, will increase. And in FAO, it is projected to be at least about 20% in the coming years. Of course, this will have a tremendous impact on the natural resource use, especially the need for nitrogen, of course, consequently, the pollution associated to nitrogen losses. Especially this growth will be marked by a couple of regions, especially in Latin America, Africa, or Asia. And we see that the consumption of animal products and also other agriculture products will be much more stagnant in high-income countries, especially in Europe and North America. But if we look at the different sources of emissions, so we understand that mainly nitrogen emissions are occurring at any stage of production, from the production of input materials, especially fertilizer or pesticides, until the consumption of product. So the emissions are occurring at each stage. So it's important that we address those emissions if we want to keep nitrogen within, of course, the climate discussion, but also biodiversity convention, as well as the combating desertification convention. So nitrogen is highly, they say, a high pollutant because it contributes to climate change, acidification, eutrophication, biodiversity loss, but also other impact on human health that has been cited before by my predecessors. So if we look at the livestock systems, we see that the emission of nitrous oxides are around 15% of the total emission from the livestock sector. This represents about 1 gigaton of CO2 in terms of CO2 equivalents. But of course, the impact of this is much more higher when it comes to climate as compared to the small portion of nitrogen. However, nitrogen is highly lost in other forms. And we see mainly the emission of ammonia that occurs at different stage of production, from crop production to the processing, the emission of NOx, emission of ammonia, and also other compounds like nitrates that contaminate the water bodies. It's important that we link, of course, the emissions to the agriculture activities. Here, taking an example of livestock, we see that mainly in the regions where we have high concentration of livestock production, of course, those regions are associated with the emission of different compounds of nitrogen, mainly ammonia and N2O, but generally in a region where we have high crop activities, we see more emission also of the nitrates in water bodies. It's important to note that there is opportunity to improve, and of course, this opportunity is highly relevant across different production systems around the world. The access and the pathways that may lead to this improvement may be different in terms of access to resources, as well as access to solutions, adoption of best practices, behavior change for farmers. But we see the opportunity of increasing nitrogen use efficiency across different production systems around the world. Looking at the pathways, FAO published recently the pathways towards lower emissions. Here we will focus mainly on N2O emissions. We see that there are a couple of main solutions, but the bottom line is that the food production will increase in the future, and this will have an impact on increasing greenhouse gas emissions. In the case of livestock, about 46% increase in emission by 2050. Therefore, it's important that we take action now to reduce the pollution and also to reduce the impact of those gases on climate. So the first solution are mainly related to the consumption. It's important that we see that consumption, change in dietary consumption, but also reduction of food loss and waste can reduce tremendously the emissions. However, of course, we see that this may be counterbalanced by the need to ensure food security for more than 800 million people that are still going hungry every day. So it's important that we rebalance the use of natural resources, but also we rebalance the access to food for all, leaving no one behind. The other important measures are mainly related to the production. This is very important, especially that NTO is embedded in different practices. And we see that increasing productivity is one of the approach that farmers also feel that they see incentives directly. Of course, improving genetics, the feeding of animals, especially the use of nitrogen-rich compounds, especially proteins, but also improving animal health. Moreover, we see that there are other solutions, especially circular bioeconomy, that is highly promoted. Although so far we see that in terms of livestock sector, the impact is still not quite higher as you could expect, because of course that is quite related to the use of the different waste materials, especially manure management systems, which is quite important. So what are we doing, of course, in terms of policy? We are at FAO supporting countries to address their climate commitment through different programs, both in livestock and crop, mainly plant production. But we are also already taking action regarding the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as FAO is preparing the forthcoming report on sustainable nitrogen management in agri-food systems that will be released in November during the COP. And of course, we are trying to bring the discussion also on the table of our members to agree on the approach on sustainable nitrogen management, especially taking the already agreed resolution at UNEP, the last two resolution agreed. So we have also engaged within the UN systems through the United Nations Environmental Management Group. We have conducted the Nexus dialogue to bring that common understanding on how to address sustainable nitrogen management within the UN systems, which I believe is a good starting point on integrating nitrogen in different conventions. Finally, I would echo Professor Mark Sutton's conclusion on nitro-finance. We need more financing to address different crises that we are facing now on biodiversity, pollution, climate change. It's really important that we understand that farming community cannot change behavior if there is no direct incentives. So it's important that we seek for local specific solutions, but in many cases, it's important to integrate either public or private financing to help farmers adapt to the changing climate and also other crises that are happening. So on that, I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to share those insights with you. Over to you. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I think there's a couple of very important things that you raised there. One is that we can't just hand the target onto the farmers and expect them to pick it up. We need to have transition plans. And that's where I think the sharing of good practice in this area would be really critical. Our next speaker is Irene Faisalabad. Close enough. a global head of international affairs at the Compassion in World Farming. She leads the organization's international work at the United Nations and all relevant global policy processes, focusing primarily on sustainable livestock production and food systems transformation. Prior to joining Compassion, she worked in strategic communications and public affairs for several multinational pharmaceutical companies. Irene, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll take the microphone as well. Thanks so much. I want to thank the panel of speakers. As you can imagine, and as you saw, it's a very busy week for everybody with negotiations, so some of them had to leave a little bit early, but I know a lot of people are online, and thank you for being here. For all the perspectives have been offered today, the breadth of perspectives we're getting really shows how nitrogen impacts everyone and everywhere. And by everywhere, I also mean here. Right now, we are here, but we have the agricultural negotiations taking place. And as you know, the Cornevia Joint Work on Agriculture, which was the predecessor of what we have now, we had workshops specifically on nutrient management and manure management. But also at the same time here, the presidency also runs an event on synergies between Rio Conventions for land, nature, and climate. So we're very timely, in a very timely manner, we're discussing an issue that's very relevant to all those discussions. As Felix said, I'm Irene Pizzilidi, that's the pronunciation of my name, the Global Head of International Affairs at Compassion in World Farming. For those of you who don't know CAWF, we're a farmer-founded NGO working on food systems transformation with a focus on animal agriculture and its impact on animals and the environment. The CIWF International Affairs team works across the UN system at the science policy interface to create a sustainable, healthier, and higher welfare existence for humans, animals, and the planet. We know that animal agriculture can be part of the solution in delivering the Rio Conventions, all the internationally agreed targets and goals for climate, biodiversity, and desertification. Now, among the issues we follow quite closely, as you have probably gathered, is nitrogen waste and pollution. And we've historically followed it at UNEP, in UNEP and the United Nations Environment Assembly, the second committee of the General Assembly, the Food and Agriculture Organization, here the UNFCCC, and we're now expanding the coverage of that with the CBD and the UNFCCC. Because as we've heard today, it truly is an interlinked issue that cannot and must not be siloed. And that's why we're also very pleased to engage as a member of the steering committee of FAO's LEAP partnership, as well as the Global Agenda of Sustainable Livestock. And we're also members of the steering committee of UNEP's GPNM, the Global Partnership for Nutrient Management. All these forums are a very, very effective way in breaking down barriers and enabling this multi-level and multi-sectoral coordination we need to see on issues like nitrogen. Now, where does our interest in nitrogen stem from? And it's really two areas. First, the vast amounts of our world's croplands that are used to feed animals, raised in mostly industrial systems. In the US, for example, more than 90% of soybean crop is fed to food-producing animals. And to produce these crops, among other chemicals, of course, we need synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. However, we know that globally, 70 to 80% of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers is lost to air, runs off from agricultural fields into natural ecosystems, or is otherwise wasted. So environmental, health, and financial implications come with such waste. And secondly, as also covered by the technical experts in the presentation in this event, industrial livestock production comes with its own set of nitrogen-related problems at the farm level. Some examples include manure management problems, ammonia, particle concentration, air and water pollution, to name some of them. So through our work with governments and the UN, we know that changes to our agri-food systems can make animal agriculture part of the solution in safeguarding our climate, ecosystems, soils, and lands. And these changes include transforming not just the way we produce and trade our food, but also what we eat, how much of it we eat, and where it comes from in terms of how local or not local it is. So urgent action is needed. I'm not going to repeat everything that was mentioned by the experts and member states and UNEP, but we need both immediate tangible changes addressing efficient use of nitrogen, but also those longer-term transformational changes that include the obvious, but also the not so obvious. For example, behavioral changes towards diets, especially where we have concentration of high consumption, high income countries or high consuming populations. And also we can also start thinking about the number of animals that comes into those farming systems and how they are farmed, how they are reared, and what are the co-benefits in the way we rear them. So it's undoubtedly we have to embrace technology and innovation. There was a lot of talk at COP28. These talks continued here around the declaration or not around the declaration about technology and innovation in agriculture. But we must also recognize that traditional and indigenous knowledge, especially in certain areas in the world, has been the original innovation and still holds so much relevance today and deserves to be protected and scaled up. At present, the issue of nitrogen waste is mostly an agricultural one. We talk about it because of the way we produce food. But as we have been committing more and more in this space and engaging with diverse stakeholders, we're seeing immense interest in the energy and transport sectors. For example, with green ammonia, which has the potential to triple or quadruple the use of nitrogen globally. So if there's one thing that's incredibly clear as we go through the years of discussing how close we are to 2030, is that we need to get this issue right. Conceptually, nitrogen waste and pollution can be very complicated. And while the people in this room and in the virtual call and online as well might understand it very well, we know that policymakers everywhere elsewhere may not. So we want to partner with member states and governments, academics, stakeholders to best advance sustainable nitrogen management in various policy instruments throughout the Rio Conventions and beyond. So we commend governments that were here today and in the audience and the ones that have been vanguards on nitrogen, and we certainly welcome a broader and more ambitious coalition of countries looking to collaborate, coordinate, and accelerate action in tackling the issue of sustainable nitrogen management from global to national level. I'll just close by saying that the responsibility to sustainably manage nitrogen cannot and should not fall solely on governments, farmers, or academia, or civil society, or even all of us at consumer level. It requires a whole of society approach, true multi-stakeholder engagement. So as you leave here, think about your role in this solution and do get in touch with us, do contact us, do talk to us after the event. We are made up of professionals that work across the policy and science sphere and would be very happy to collaborate with everybody else in order to deliver a sustainable, healthier, and higher welfare planet for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irina. I always like the example you'd give of, some of the answers aren't complicated. It's like, don't put fertilizer down when it's going to rain. I mean, it seems a silly thing to say, but that has an impact. And if you can share some of that with farmers, they would actually appreciate it. So I think that's very important. Our final speaker, who's joining us virtually as well, is someone who's been mentioned a number of times, Mikhail Constantinescu. He's the co-chair of UNEP's working group on nitrogen and director of prevention and reduction management unit in the Ministry of Environment, Waters and Forestry in Romania. His 18 years of experience in developing and implementing agriculture and rural development strategies and financing programs in Romania and the Western Balkan countries. He's worked with the Romanian Ministry of Agriculture, European Commission, and the Danish International Development Agency. And he joined the Ministry of Environment in 2017. Mikhail, you have the floor.
Thank you. I hope you hear me well.
Yes.
Good. I would like to start by congratulating the previous speakers. They gave me quite a lot of notes that I would like to comment with the idea of how to use this valuable information in the work that we are doing all together with the rest of the member states at the level of UNEP. Obviously, nitrogen is invisible, but we have to make it visible in international policies and in national policies. We are having now in the working group on sustainable nitrogen management at the level of UNEP, 95 countries, and it's a tremendous work that we have to do on two directions. First of all, nitrogen is not quite well integrated at international legislation, international policies. We have scattered elements and more recent, which is quite encouraging, targets, but nitrogen is not yet the link that it has to be between various conventions, protocols, and other international initiatives. This is a work that has to start and will have to continue in the following years, and it's not a work that will be finished in a few years. At the level of the member states, I would say it's even much more to work. We do have policies on nitrogen, but again, are divided, are not integrated. We have some policies in some countries. We do have policies on water protection, and we do have policies on air quality. We do speak about ammonia, but we don't see the synergies and trade-offs with the nitrates. Where all the member states are having ministries for agriculture, where food security and nitrogen, yes, is the main solution. Is working on improving the efficiency of agriculture, but at the same time we have to work on improving the efficiency of nitrogen use. It remains with us this tremendous work for the next years to work with the various conventions and protocols and to be a bit more ambitious. There are countries doing quite a lot, not very much in an integrated manner, but are doing quite a lot, and especially on agriculture. And at the international level, products from agricultural products are meeting on the market. There is a need to look on how member states and what kind of efforts are doing to produce food and what kind of constraints nitrogen means and what kind of benefits nitrogen means. I would call and first of all praise the scientific community for doing various research studies on nitrogen, and obviously nitrogen has a positive impact if it's managed well, and a negative impact if it's not managed well. On the challenges regarding energy, there is, I think it remains a lot work to be done at the level of research. But we may have quite a lot of surprises when it comes to green ammonia, meaning ammonia for energy. We have a tremendous potential, but we have risks. And these risks should be further assessed to be able to prepare policies at international level and at national level. The working group on sustainable nitrogen management will have to consider all these challenges in the following years. We do have the ambitions to look towards 2030 and beyond. For this, we are working at a roadmap that will be presented at the end of the month at the end of the month at the 6th meeting of the working group in Nairobi. We do have to incorporate all the deliverables and all the achievable goals in an ambitious way, and to work a bit more with the member states. Doing this, we like to have the scientific community close to us. We like to have NGOs as well close to us. And I believe the ultimate goal is to develop, prepare, and implement national action plans at the level of the member states. Without this, I don't think we'll be able to say that our work has an impact on reducing the nitrogen waste. So we have to be ready and committed to do this work in the following years in an organized manner. And for this, I have to appreciate the commitment of UNEP. In the last years, I think this was very visible. UNEP offered a secretariat for the working group and organized the working group. And I think this is starting to make a change. The scientific community was always with us, and I have to appreciate that without the scientific community being involved in this process, I don't think we even had minimum steps on this work. And we intend as well to include the scientific community and to involve a bit more in the process of and the work of the working group. I don't want to finish without appreciating the Compassion in World Farming. I know that they work hard for this event, and not only. I know that they are very much committed and very knowledgeable in nitrogen policies, and they are doing quite a lot of progress, and they're professional in whatever they've done before, and they are doing now, in the sense that they are technically involved in a supporting manner, both to the process at the level of UNEP and as well at the level of the member states. So thank you again for this and for the invitation.
Thank you. And thank you for your appreciative comments about the work that Compassion is doing. And I think also it's important to remember that one of the key elements of UNEP's mandate is science. And I think their support for the work that you're doing and that UNEP's recognized that this is such a critical issue is really important. So we're going to finish now because I'm aware that we have to be out in the next 5 minutes, so we won't have time for questions. I do apologize, but I want to thank you and the presenters for being here. I think this has been a really interesting conversation that we've had, and I hope it's given you an indication that it is one of the emerging issues that we need to address very quickly, particularly if we're going to hit the target by 2030. There needs to be coordinated work between member states, international organizations, and stakeholders. So without further ado, thank you very much for coming. I close the meeting.